Alright, this is going to explore the Anatman concept, which is at odds with the traditional concept of Atman, or soul, which is still a predominant theme, and even modern so-called religion or spirituality. There's still the separation between soul and body, and the concept that our soul or individual persona exists as a soul that comes and goes through many lifetimes independently. So here's the article, and again, I'll post a link to it. I always reference something, so it's not just me ranting, but this is about the Anatman, and starts off with basically there's a quote from one of the sutras where some guy asks, well, is there a self? And Gautama, so-called Buddha, says nothing. Then he says, well, is there not a self? Then Gautama says nothing. And so this is the basis of the Anatman concept. Anatman is the idea that there is no self, at least no self in the Hindu definition of Atman. There are three aspects to the concept of Anatman. An means not. So Atman means soul, self. An means not soul, self. So one of the concepts involved is the lack of an essence. They'll tell you to probe your body, your flesh, muscles, blood vessels, organs, bones. Tell me where you see a self. Now, somebody object to that and say, well, that's shallow. I mean, it's invisible. But they're getting at a point because they're trying to say that, well, everybody thinks their soul is inside the body. And like I said, this feeling of being inside the body is really from the brain, the thalamus, and the center of the brain, actually. But it's not really a ghost inside the body. This is what Anatman is disputing, this premise, this tenet. So, lack of an essence. If you probe your body, where are you? Where is the essence? Can't be found in the bones, the marrow, nowhere. Also, second, impermanence, meaning there's no constant self. Like I said, what picture would you take to say this is me? Your baby picture, your childhood picture, your preteen picture, your young adult picture, when you grow into an elderly, nobody wants to use those pictures, or when you just cease to be. You see what I'm saying? What picture would be you? As I said, flux is constant flux. It never is a state of being as such. It is always in a state of becoming and actually non-becoming. So again, what would be you? Like a lot of people picture themselves discarnate as their discarnate self, which is really an ectoplasmic version of their current self. So they would be like, if they pass as an adult, then there's this ghostly figure of them being an adult. But that's false, because that's based on the body, which is ever changing. So that can't be real. So that goes into the impermanence concept too. Then interdependence on individuals and things. Just the fact that, like I said, you come from your parents. You're a fusion of your parents. You look like your damn daddy and mama. Most of us do. And we also act like them in a lot of ways. And then we have our unique traits. But that's the interdependence of it, for one thing. So you're not even a self-existent being from that aspect. The fact that you're a fusion of your parents. And there's also the aspect of, well, what about society? Nature and nurture, culture. That also determines a lot of what you wish to do, your so-called goals and dreams, and your belief systems. It's all dependent. That's not even truly you. Like, where are you? Who are you? So, the idea that selves do not have an essence is based on the belief on the existence of the five constituents: the body, consciousness, karmic activities, feelings, and perceptions. Meaning, if you break everything down to say, well, where am I? Consciousness, of course, is the brain and gut brain neurons based on the body. Karmic activities, again, that's not necessarily karma as you get, like if you hit somebody, somebody's going to hit you back. Not necessarily, but they're talking about trajectory and motion, really based off frequency and feelings, which how you feel at the moment. Is that really you? Could you say that's you? And perception, which is sense perception, mental perception, how we perceive events, things, the world, how we perceive the world. But these are all based on the five constituents, as they call them, the five skandhas, the aggregates, based on a body, having a mind body. The combination of these five constituents creates who we are. No one part can represent us. So therefore, Buddhists argue that there is no single essence, which leads them to believe that there can be no self. Impermanence, the second belief, implies that everything changes and that nothing stays the same. This is a critical concept in Buddhist philosophy. If nothing stays the same, then there can be no permanent or constant self. We change with each experience, and with each moment we are alive. Therefore, we are a different self every minute of our lives, and the concept of self becomes irrelevant. So again, you transform through life, you so-called grow. Like people say, I feel like I'm growing. Like personally, me, I feel like a whole different person from childhood, just based upon input, intuition, contemplation, and reflection, and also digesting new concepts. It's like I'm a whole different person. Even this body is not the same as it was. So that's what they're saying. If you just look at that fact, there's no permanent self. So they're saying that becomes irrelevant. And that goes into dependent origination, which was one of Buddha's or Shakyamuni's original teachings about that. Finally, Buddhism also strongly stresses the idea of interdependence. That's the notion that everything affects everything else in the phenomenal world. If one thing changes, then everything changes. Therefore, if the so-called self is dependent on everything else, then the self does not really and cannot really exist on its own. That's what I talked about in a previous video, of its own accord. No, we don't. Even Nietzsche said if you affirm yourself, you have to affirm the world, because just the fact that you're dependent on, the Taoists would say, 10,000 things. As soon as you're born, you are dependent. You need food, clothing, shelter, and everything else. Even socially, emotionally, you're a dependent creature. So if you affirm yourself, you're affirming the world itself to get your food, the other people you want to be around, the other things that you need to entertain you, etc. So the concept of Anatman does not necessarily mean that there is not a self. However, the text displayed at the beginning of this page illustrates this idea. The quote shows that there is no self, yet at the same time there is no self. In this sense, the Buddha is following the middle way and does not give into either extreme, which is eternalism or annihilationism. He is also acknowledging the fact that there is a concept of the self, though Buddhism does not adhere to it. Basically, he's saying Buddhism would say, well, these Brahmins and these Hindus, their concept of a self is based on the body. They're saying, since I see a body, a persona, this represents an individual self. Buddha said, no, that's not correct. That's just a psychophysical body, a temporal persona that comes and goes. But he would also say, well, there's not no self, in the sense that, as I mentioned in the previous video on rebirth, if you think about how we all say I, like everybody says I, like a million times a day, everybody says I. This I can't be the local I if everybody's mentioning this I. So he would say, well, yes, the psychophysical temporal persona body self does come and go, but this I stays. And again, that goes back to the permanence of this blind will that even Schopenhauer picked up on. That's the permanence that we can mention. But he would also say, but the temporal persona self, the one that grows, gets old and leaves and ceases, that ceases. So that was his way of saying the middle way, but also disputing this concept of self, these transmigrating selves. This idea of Anatman, or no self, is evident in Buddhist cultures and society. First, Buddhist cultures generally emphasize the body as one of the 5 constituents, the aggregates, the matter, the material elements, which I went into in atomism. In Samkhya Hinduism and in Christianity, to the contrary, there is a strong idea of separation between the two. So that's what I was talking about earlier, this separation between the soul and body. That's one of the major tenets of Buddhism, which a lot of people try to overlook out of conceit. I believe it's conceit. But they're saying no, versus Christianity with the soul going to heaven thing, that's intellectually dishonest. So second, there is also a focus on the present rather than on the past or the future, as some other cultures tend to do. Because of the notion of impermanence, Buddhists know that the only constant thing is change itself. Therefore, they emphasize the present moment. And that's where you get into that power of now. A lot of people pick up on that, which is a valuable teaching and exploration. Not devaluing that, but they go even deeper than that. But this notion of enjoying one's present situation is also apparent in cultures of Buddhist religio. Very different from the Western notion of working so hard to plan for the future that one often forgets the present moment they are in. So she just explored that concept of Anatman. I posted a link to this article. And do a little more on the esoteric inner teachings of Buddhism. Peace.